Hello and welcome to the Arc Woman podcast. This is an exploration of womankind. Here we discuss what it is to be a woman in the modern world while utilizing ancient and modern modalities in tandem to create a bounty of health for the body, mind and spirit.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the pod. Today we are going to be covering iron, what it is, all about iron deficiency, how to treat it, how to test it. Let's do this. It's going to be a pretty in-depth episode, so you will need to have some background understanding around minerals, how they work in the body, enzymes, and some basic biology. But overall, if you're a layperson, you will be able to enjoy this podcast. But I'm just letting you know, we are going to be getting pretty in-depth. I am going to explain things as best as I can. So let's go. What is iron? How do we use it? And how do we store it? So what's iron function? Iron is an essential mineral that's involved in the transport of oxygen through hemoglobin in red blood cells. So in red blood cells, there is a molecule called hemoglobin. So it's a protein. So it's made of amino acids. And it uses 4 iron molecules, heme iron, which is a type of iron. We will be talking about heme iron, and how it can basically lock onto oxygen in the blood. And so blood cells go into the lungs, the areolas, they push oxygen into these red blood cells. The hemoglobin capture each a molecule of oxygen and they hold onto it, and then they disperse it throughout the body. So that's why if you have iron deficiency anemia, you have short, shallow breaths, because you're having a really hard time getting that oxygen into your hemoglobin because you have low iron. You don't actually have that many hemoglobin molecules. I digress. So it's crucial for energy production, really important for immune function and cellular growth. Iron is also a component of several enzymes that are involved in energy metabolism and DNA synthesis. So absolutely essential mineral. We can't produce it endogenously in the body, so we need to absorb it. So where is iron absorbed? It's actually absorbed in the duodenum, which is actually the first part of the small intestine, and it's more efficiently absorbed in its heme form, which we only find from animal products. And that's another argument for eating animal products, if they work for you, of course, than the non-heme form, which you find in plant-based foods. We also need vitamin C. So that's a cofactor that we need around that's going to enhance non-heme iron absorption. So if you are vegan or plant-based or vegetarian and you're not eating red meat or animal meat sources, then animal protein sources, then you're going to need to make sure that you have a little bit of a mandarin or some lemon in your water or some type of vitamin C accompanying any type of iron that you're eating. Maybe even use a cast iron stove pot or fry pan so you can infuse your food with a little bit more iron as well. So where do we store iron in the body? So after absorption, so after we absorb it in the duodenum, it binds to transferrin. So this is an enzyme. Transferrin moves iron, heme iron, around the body, or non-heme iron. It's a protein that transports it to various cells or uses it for storage. So we have a little bit of iron that travels freely in the body, and we will talk about why that isn't really good. We need to have a little bit of free iron, but not too much. Most of it we want to see bound to transferrin. So the primary storage of iron is called ferritin, which is located in the liver, spleen, and bone marrow. If iron is not immediately needed, it's stored as ferritin, where it remains as a non-toxic form. So if you have really low ferritin, then we need to find the reason why it's low and why your body's felt the need to go through all of its ferritin stores. So it's not just about testing your iron, it's about figuring out what's triggering this response. Why are we running low on these stores? So I spoke about a few of the cofactors and key nutrients previously, one of them being vitamin C, but the other one that's really important is copper. So copper plays a really crucial role in the release of iron from storage. Without adequate copper, we can't actually properly utilize or transport iron throughout the body. And copper deficiency can also lead to iron deficiency, despite you actually having more than enough iron around. So that's where, if you get low iron tests back and you go, I just need to take an iron supplement, hold up, baby girl. We need to make sure that everything else is in place, because it's not just one thing. The whole system works together. And if one thing's out, something else is out. And it might not actually be low iron. It might be low copper and a bunch of other things. Another one might be vitamin A. So vitamin A is really important for the proper use of iron. So it helps to regulate iron metabolism, and it supports its production of heme iron in the body. So when we have low levels of vitamin A, it really can contribute to low and, iron deficiency and low iron in the body. The next one is zinc. So zinc competes with iron for absorption in the gut. So when we have an imbalance in zinc levels, it can affect iron status. So when we have zinc supplementation, it should be done very carefully to avoid interfering with iron absorption. So zinc is amazing, but it stops the absorption of both copper and iron. So that means that you can have iron deficiency or iron deficiency anemia, even if you're eating a steak a day and you're using a cast iron and you're eating all the leafy greens and all of the iron-rich foods. Well, if you're taking zinc at the same time, or you have a low copper diet, then it's also going to negatively impact iron absorption and usage in the body. And of course, the last one is vitamin C. So this enhances non-heme iron absorption. Again, really important for vegans and vegetarians. If you are starkly, absolutely not interested in eating animal products, then you need to make sure that you're having vitamin C with your plant-based meals. And so it aids in the reduction of ferric iron, which is Fe3+, and it turns it into ferrous iron, which is Fe2+, which is the form the body can absorb. So taking away an ion so we can actually absorb it properly. The interesting thing about iron and a bunch of other minerals in the body is that there is a recycling system, and there is a really beautiful iron recycling system. So the body recycles iron really efficiently, and even more so efficiently in women. So it's really concerning if you have iron deficiency, because it means that that system has been out of whack for a really long time. So when red blood cells break down, and remember there's heme iron in them, and the iron is released from that hemoglobin molecule and returned to the bloodstream via transferrin, this process prevents iron deficiency by making sure that we're continuously reusing that iron. Macrophages in the spleen and liver also play a really important role in recycling iron from dead and old blood cells. So they break down these old blood cells or dead blood cells, and they release the iron back into circulation for reuse in new cells. And so this is where, if we have a little bit of free iron, we can go, okay, cool, we know that those macrophages are doing the right job. And so this is another thing. If you've had low-grade infection for such a long time and your macrophages are low, it means that the iron recycling system is also going to be negatively impacted, which might also lead to iron deficiency anemia and just general low iron labs. Before we get into this, I just think we need to cover on iron overload. So iron overload occurs when excess iron accumulates in the body, and this can lead to toxicity and potential organ damage. So iron is amazing, but too much of it really not amazing, especially when it's in its free form. So the body has limited ability to excrete excess iron. So when iron intake exceeds the body's needs or the iron recycling system fails, it can accumulate in the tissues such as the liver, heart, and pancreas, and also in our gut. And we will talk about the negative consequences of that further along in this podcast. So what are some of the causes of iron overload? So one of them is hemochromatosis. And I know a few people with this genetic disorder. It leads to an excessive iron absorption and storage. So you're a little bit too good. So your iron recycling system is a little bit too efficient, and we're overstoring it, and our body doesn't know how to let this go. It's kind of hoarding it in a way. So people with hemochromatosis absorb more iron than they need, and they store it really efficiently. And this results in accumulation in the organs and tissues, right? The interesting thing about hemochromatosis is that the symptoms of iron overload and the symptoms of iron deficiency are the same. And there's actually this amazing ultramarathon runner. Her name's Camilla. She's incredible. And her story is really interesting. I was listening to her speak, I think it was with Rich Roll, about how she assumed that she had iron deficiency. And so she was really focusing on getting more iron into her diet. She went and got her labs done, and they figured out she had hemochromatosis. So never assume from your symptoms. I mean, you can use your symptoms as biomarkers, but things like minerals, you don't really want to muck around with them. Please go and get your labs done. Another one is repeated blood transfusions. So this is when we're introducing large amounts of iron into the body over time, especially in women or just individuals with anemia who require frequent transfusions. We'll talk about transfusions again. Dietary factors, so consuming too much iron, particularly through supplements or heme iron-rich foods, that can contribute to overload as well. And hemodialysis, so this can lead to iron overload because the blood being treated with iron to prevent anemia. So this is where we are having, like, these three examples that I've just given are in cases where people are assuming that they have iron deficiency and they're overloading their body with lots and lots and lots of iron when it might be a bunch of other factors. Another one is hormonal birth control and the lack of periods. So hormonal birth control suppresses menstruation, reducing the body's natural mechanism of iron loss through blood loss. And so that's why our bodies recycling system is a little bit better than men's, and our, that iron recycling system, our macrophages are a little bit more activated. We're really great with vitamin A and copper and vitamin C in the body as well, and absorbing those nutrients. And so the female body, because it already knows it's going to be menstruating every month, roundabout there, and also we fall pregnant, and when we fall pregnant, we have about 10 to 15 more liters of blood. So our systems are really geared towards iron is good, we need more of it, not less of it. But when we introduce things like hormonal birth control, and you don't take those days off and you don't have that withdrawal bleed, or if you have an IUD or the implant on and you just don't have your period, well, this is going to lead to iron accumulation, right? Because we don't have that monthly iron loss from periods. Let's talk about excess iron and its impact on hormones. So when we have prolonged use of hormonal birth control, it really interferes with that iron regulation, because we're used to losing that iron. We're not losing it, which means we have an increased risk of overload. Estrogen and iron also have a relationship. So excess estrogen, which is common in conditions like endometriosis, or even just excess estrogen, I find most of the women in my clinic, I'm always screening for estrogen dominance. And I don't want to say it's all women, but I will say it's super common, and I'm really used to seeing it. So hormonal birth control, and so synthetic estradiol and naturally circulating estradiol, they're not the same. They are different molecules. We can't, replicate it absolutely exactly every single time. I mean, you can with HRT and make bioidenticals, but I would argue that nothing is ever identical to the estrogen you're making in your body. I digress. So estrogen influences iron metabolism, and it affects its regulation of hepcidin, which is a hormone that controls iron absorption, and it tends to upregulate it. Also in PCOS, we see like higher levels of estrogen and insulin resistance at the same time. We see this in endo, where we don't have the insulin resistance part, but we definitely have the inflammation. And so in both cases, we can see an increased risk of iron overload. And this is where we are seeing some negative consequences in the gut, because that's a place where we can store excess iron, and that's where pathogens and parasites love to feed on excess unbound iron. Parasites and pathogens are super popular at the moment. Everyone's talking about them and what they feed on in the gut. And they definitely are important when we are talking about iron excess, specific to the gut. So pathogens and parasites in the gut, they thrive on excess iron as they use it to fuel their growth. This is really concerning for people with iron overload, as the excess unbound iron can exacerbate gut dysbiosis and the proliferation of harmful microbes. Also, fungal infections and bacterial growth. So many of these pathogenic bacteria and fungi, such as Candida or Helicobacter pylori, which is really important. You can test that through a breath test. They love an iron-rich environment. They feed off of this surplus iron, and they cause infections or worsen gastrointestinal issues. And it's really interesting in my clinic when women eat so much red meat and eat off of cast irons, they're eating all of the cofactors. We look at their labs, but they still have really low iron. And then we go and do a gut lab, or we do a H. pylori breath test, and it comes back positive. And we go, okay, that's where all of your iron is going. We're basically feeding all of these pathogens and parasites in the gut. So if you have low iron, that's definitely something we need to test out. The other point is a compromised immune system. So when we have excess iron, it contributes to chronic infections, and iron overload may impair the body's ability to fight off infections effectively. So you can see how this would interplay with possible parasites and pathogens. I probably will be doing some content on pathogens and parasites in the future, because this is something I am seeing repetitively in my clinic. But basically for now, you need to be doing some type of parasite or pathogen cleanse every single year. Most countries in the world do it. Everyone but the West. We think that just because we have so much sanitation that we don't have parasites. Newsflash, if you are outside for 20 minutes a day, you've patted your dog recently, or you have cats, or you're around animals, then you most probably have parasites. Going on from that iron overload, what are some symptoms and warning signs to look out for? So the first one is histamine sensitivity. This is one of those common symptoms of iron overload, is an increased sensitivity to histamine, resulting in symptoms like headaches, itching, hives, or nasal congestion. The next is fatigue and joint pain. So excessive iron accumulation can lead to symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, and weakness, which is so funny because those are the symptoms that we usually would assume being associated with iron deficiency. So again, never assume you have an iron deficiency or overload. Just go and do a test first and possibly back that up with a H. pylori breath test and looking at a gut microbiome test as well to rule out any pathogens and parasites. Another thing is skin changes. So over time, people with iron overload, they develop a bronze or grayish skin tint due to the deposition of iron in the skin, and also GI issues, so like IBS, for example. So iron overload can affect the gut, obviously, because we're storing so much of it in its free form in the gut, and that's feeding pathogens and, these nasty bacteria, yeast, and fungi. And so this leads to abdominal pain, bloating, and also altered bowel movement. So if you have any of these, it might be iron overload, it might be iron deficiency anemia. You need to go and do a test, basically. As we're talking about testing, how can you test for iron overload? So you can get a full iron panel. And so this is going to measure serum iron, transferrin saturation, ferritin, and total iron binding capability, which is also known as TIBC. Also, C-reactive protein, also known as CRP. So this is a marker of inflammation specifically from the liver. So elevated levels of CRP indicate the presence of iron-induced inflammation. It may or it may not. And so that's why getting labs and getting a full panel instead of just getting one or two is really important. Talking about the liver, another one that would be really, really great is getting your liver enzymes. So excess iron really damages the liver. So you can test ALT and AST to really monitor for liver damage. Also, genetic testing. So if you have too much iron in the body, it might be really great to do a genetic test to test for hemochromatosis on the off chance that you have any mutations in that HFE gene. And another one is hair mineral testing. So it's not as reliable as blood tests, but hair mineral analysis can really provide really beautiful outcomes and understanding of what's actually happening in your body. What I usually say is that a blood test is telling you what's happening right now, but a hair mineral test is going to tell you what's happened in the past 3 months. And it's going to tell you a lot of different mineral deficiencies or overloads that are happening at that same time. Because if iron is out, or if copper is out, or vitamin A, the intricacy of our body system is that it's so interconnected, but that's also its Achilles heel. Because if one thing is out of touch and one thing is out of bounds or is imbalanced or dysregulated, then it's going to affect lots of other things in the body too. So say you go and get those bloods done and you're like, okay, I do have iron overload. What can I do? So bloodletting or blood donation. So if that's appropriate for you, that's a really great way to reduce iron levels by removing that excess iron from the body. But you've got to be really cautious, as frequent donation can deplete other important minerals like zinc and copper. Also, as you're doing it, just know that it burns about 10 to 15 more calories per day. So make sure you're taking something with you to replenish those nutrients and that energy you're losing. And make sure you have the rest of the day off, because, going and doing a blood donation, you are going to feel a little bit lightheaded afterwards. So please make sure you're not driving home on your own, and you have maybe utilize public transport or have a friend drive you there and back. Another thing that you can take is milk thistle and sulforaphane. So sulforaphane you can find in things like Brussels sprouts. I was actually talking about this in clinic with a client today, and I love sulforaphane. I think it's so beautiful. So these both support liver function, and they help reduce inflammation caused by iron overload. So milk thistle contains something called silymarin, which is known for its liver protective properties, and sulforaphane is just really great at clearing out anything from the liver and supporting the liver. Another thing is quercetin. So this is a natural iron chelator, and this helps to inhibit iron absorption and promotes the removal of excess iron from the tissues. Also, turmeric and castor oil packs. So these are both really beautiful natural iron chelators, and they can help to reduce inflammation and assist in iron detoxification. Another one that's probably already in your cupboard right now is green and black tea. So consuming these with meals can reduce iron absorption, particularly the non-heme type found in plant-based foods. Okay, so now we got iron overload out of the way. I wanted to touch on it because it's real and some women do experience that, but not a lot of women do. That's not the majority. When we talk about iron in clinics specific to women's health, we're never talking about, oh my gosh, so many women have too much iron in their bodies. No, we have too little, right? So we have a lot of iron deficiency. It's very, very common in the zeitgeist of women's health. So what is iron deficiency? Iron deficiency occurs when the body doesn't have enough iron to meet its needs. That might be because we're not eating enough. It might be because we have increased iron demands. We'll be talking about the causes of iron deficiency next. But iron is an essential nutrient. We need this mineral for the production of hemoglobin, which is a protein in red blood cells that carries that oxygen from the lungs to the rest of the body. When we have a deficiency in iron, this leads to a variety of health issues, particularly because it impacts iron transport, energy production, and immune function. Literally, every single organ system in the body. So what causes iron deficiency? So the first one is inadequate dietary intake, and unfortunately this is very common in the modern world because we've just went through a huge movement of plant-based and vegetarian diets. I will say it's still pretty popular. It is starting to lose momentum, which for the most part I think is a good thing. Also because that's been paired with regenerative agriculture and learning about the ethics of rearing animals, which is a whole other tangent that I won't go on right now. But basically, when we have a diet that's low in iron-rich foods, particularly that easily absorbable and high bioavailable heme iron, which we only find in animal products like red meat, liver, and fish, this leads to iron deficiency over time. And I was vegan for 7 years, almost 7 years, I would say. And I felt great up until year 4 or 5. And I started to feel so tired, right? And I didn't know what I knew now. And unfortunately, I know that I was iron deficient. I had my labs done and my transferrin, my ferritin, and my iron was so low. I remember my doctor telling me, I cannot believe you're alive right now. How are you in my office? And I was like, I don't know. And so that's when I started to research on vegan and vegetarian diets and started to change my diet and pretty much have an overnight or probably like an overweek positive reinforcement of heme iron stores. I slept better. I could see better. My iron fog dissipated. I could breathe deeper again. I had been doing breath work for years, and it was the first time in years that I'd been able to take a proper diaphragmatic breath. And so that's the thing. Your body won't really let you have a super deep breath if you're low in heme iron because there's no point, right? Because you don't actually have enough of that heme iron in your hemoglobin, in the red blood cells to capture that oxygen. So you have these short, shallow breaths all the time. And so whenever a woman comes to my clinic and has anxiety, very often I do a blood panel on her and we look for iron deficiency. And lo and behold, 9 times out of 10, that's what we find. And then we treat her for iron deficiency. Her iron stores get better. Her anxiety surprisingly goes away. And that's because the symptomology of low iron and that short, shallow breathing activates that sympathetic nervous system. And so that means you have these symptoms of anxiety, which is absolutely real. I'm not saying those things aren't real, but the baseline of that anxiety wasn't psychological. It was biology, like, right? And it was nutritional. So the other thing is plant-based diets and vegan diets. So not being able to get that not being able to get that heme iron into the diet. And I don't think a lot of people are soaking their legumes for long enough. They're not putting it with cumin and I think it's called aerozote, which is a herb that you can put them with to remove that phytic acid so you can actually access that non-heme iron and the protein. Anyway, we basically have this epidemic of women. We have about 1 billion people worldwide who have iron deficiencies, and more than half of them are women. And, a lot of them are on vegetarian and vegan diets or possibly just not eating enough heme iron in their diets to be able to get it, or they're probably not eating those cofactors, so vitamin A, copper, and vitamin C as well. The other really important aspect of causes of iron deficiency is the increased iron demand. So one of them is pregnancy. So during pregnancy, a woman's iron needs increase significantly. So iron is required for both the mother's blood volume expansion and for fetal growth. So that 10 to 15 liter mark, pretty significant. So when pregnant women develop iron deficiency anemia, it's probably because they're not meeting those increased iron demands. So you need to be eating for 2. You need to be eating enough iron to make sure you're increasing that heme iron so you can increase that hemoglobin production and make sure you can upregulate that iron and that oxygen binding in your blood so you can make sure you grow a really healthy baby. The next one is heavy menstrual bleeding. So women with heavy periods, they lose a significant amount of iron through blood loss. So 5 or more pads or tampons is a heavy day. If you have periods that are longer than 7 days and you have more than 3 days of heavy, that would constitute as being at high risk for causes of iron deficiency anemia, right? And so that's going to deplete your iron stores. If you're bleeding super heavily every single month, then I would say you probably need to book in with someone and get that rectified pretty quickly, because when we have iron deficiency storage problems and we're bleeding out so much every single month, estrogen's running haywire in the body, and this can cause a lot of other problems, including like increased incidence of breast and cervical cancer, and all of these other negative consequences on the body, like too much copper, which can prelude to depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. So if you do have heavy menstrual bleeding, please, please, please get on top of it. Another one is young women who are going through childhood and adolescence. So when you're growing and you're going through pre-puberty and you're going through puberty, especially in the periods of that rapid growth, they require far more iron. And so this is where iron deficiency is really common in this group. Another one is poor iron absorption. So conditions like celiac, Crohn's, or IBS. IBS is an interesting one because that is just an umbrella term for a bunch of different things that celiac and Crohn's would probably fall under. So these affect the gut's ability to absorb iron effectively. And not the gut, the duodenum, because that's where we're absorbing most of it. And excess iron is stored in the gut, in those pathogens, right? And in the problematic bacteria. But if they're not there, iron is still stored there for the most part. People with a history of gastrointestinal surgery or gastric bypass surgery also have a reduced absorption due to alterations in their digestive system. Again, specifically in that duodenum area. Another cause of iron deficiency anemia is blood loss. So gastrointestinal bleeding, so where you have ulcers or hemorrhoids or even colorectal cancer, this can lead to internal bleeding, and this can deplete iron stores. And also, if you're frequently donating blood, of course, that's going to deplete your iron stores. And another one is hormonal birth control, which is so interesting. So some women can have iron overload with hormonal birth control, and some women can have such huge hormonal fluctuations after going off of hormonal birth control or when they're on it, that it can deplete their iron deficiency and really mess up their iron recycling system. So that's really interesting. So what are the symptoms of iron deficiency? So the first, and the one that we'll hear the most, is fatigue and weakness. So this is one of the most common symptoms. Without sufficient iron, we can't produce enough hemoglobin, which means that we have decreased binding of oxygen and we don't deliver it to tissues effectively enough, which means we have this just general sense of tiredness and weakness. Next is paleness. So usually when women are iron deficient, we see that their skin is really, really pale, especially in their face, lips, or inside their lower eyelids. Also, shortness of breath, what I was speaking about before. So you can't have deep breaths. So you have these feelings of breathlessness and almost oxygen hunger, especially when you're exercising or any type of physical activity. Also, dizziness and lightheadedness. So when you sit up really quickly or you get out of bed, you feel really dizzy, or you might even black out. So that's insufficient iron, and that's by that oxygen and that lack of oxygen in the brain. And so that leads to fainting, lightheadedness, and dizziness. Also, headaches. So iron deficiency may trigger headaches due to the reduced oxygen supply to the brain. Cold hands and feet. So if you're always cold, that's also going back to that poor oxygen delivery. That's impacting your circulation pretty negatively. So you're always cold. If you do have cold exposure, you find it really hard to warm up again. The other one is restless legs syndrome. So some individuals with iron deficiency experience an uncontrollable urge to move their legs, especially with resting, which can be a direct symptom of low iron. Also, brittle nails and hair. So iron deficiency can cause your hair to become really thin or brittle, and nails can become really weak and prone to breakage. Also, craving non-food items. So if you love chewing on ice or starch, or you crave clay, or you just love the feeling of dirt. This is a weird one. I think a lot of women who are like, why do I want to eat dirt? Well, you're low in iron. The other one is glossitis. So this is inflammation of the tongue. So it appears really smooth and swollen. And so this is usually what we see with iron deficiency. Another one is chest pain. So this is really in severe cases of iron deficiency anemia. So the lack of oxygen carrying blood cells can lead to chest pain, arrhythmias, and even heart complications, again, because we can't get that oxygen to the heart tissue. So what are some laboratory tests for iron deficiency anemia? When you suspect this, laboratory tests can be used to confirm the diagnosis. Again, anything with minerals, please test. I know it's expensive and annoying, but I think it's really important. Serum iron, off the bat. This measures the amount of iron circulating in the blood. Low serum iron levels are often indicative of iron deficiency. So that's that free iron. The next one is ferritin. So ferritin is a protein that stores iron in the body. Low ferritin levels are one of the most sensitive indicators of iron deficiency because it reflects depleted iron stores even before anemia develops. So something to look out for. Also, total iron binding capacity, also known as TIBC. This measures how much transferrin, which is an iron binding protein, is available to carry the iron in the blood. In iron deficiency, TIBC is usually really high or elevated as the body is trying to increase the availability of transferrin to absorb more iron. Another one is transferrin saturation. So this measures the percentage of transferrin that is saturated with iron. So that's how much transferrin has iron attached to it. Low transferrin saturation, which we would say is lower than 20%, is a really strong indicator of iron deficiency. Another thing that you can look out for is hemoglobin and hematocrit. So these standard tests, they assess the number of red blood cells and the amount of hemoglobin in the blood. And when we have low levels of either of these, this can really often accompany any type of iron deficiency. Also MCV. So MCV measures the average size of red blood cells. When we have iron deficiency anemia, the red blood cells are typically smaller than normal. What happens if you go and get your iron labs done, but you're eating enough iron, you're taking all of those cofactors, what else could be up? So you could also test for H. pylori, so Helicobacter pylori. So this is a bacteria that infects the stomach lining, and it's really common underlying cause of iron deficiency that often goes undiagnosed. And so you can pick this up in a breath test. Or you can also pick it up in other tests as well, but the breath test is probably the best. So H. pylori, it damages the gastric mucosa. It impairs stomach acid production, and stomach acid is really crucial for breaking down food and releasing iron, especially non-heme iron for absorption in the small intestine. Low stomach acid also prevents adequate iron absorption, so we need an acidic environment to be able to absorb and break apart that iron from its food and absorb it in the duodenum. So when we have chronic infections, this can cause gastritis and even bleeding ulcers, and this can also lead to blood loss, which is going to further deplete those iron stores. So again, stool test for non-invasive tests that detects H. pylori. Urea breath test is also really great for identifying an active H. pylori infection. And you can also do an endoscopy with biopsy. So this is a really severe case that we would use this, and this is going to confirm the presence of H. pylori in the stomach lining. You will be offered antibiotics or any acid suppressing medication, and I would probably say don't do that if you do have positive H. pylori. Use that as a just in case protocol. Some things that you can do instead is focus on some more holistic ways of dealing with this. So increasing stomach acid so you can actually access iron. So apple cider vinegar diluted in warm water before you eat. Digestive bitters, they're herbal blends that stimulate gastric acid production. You can also take betaine, HCl, and pepsin. So this is going to support acid levels and digestion. You can also use natural antimicrobials like mastic gum. So this is a gum that's derived from the mastic tree, and it's been shown to kill H. pylori and support the stomach lining. So you can take 500 milligrams 2 to 3 times a day for up to 8 weeks. Another one is berberine. So this is a plant alkaloid with potent antimicrobial effects that can directly target H. pylori. You can take 400 to 500 milligrams 2 to 3 times a day, but I do be warned, it does decrease insulin and it can have some impact on your blood sugar regulation and cause you to lose weight. So if you don't have any extra weight, then don't take berberine. Another one you can take is manuka honey. So this is really beautiful. Don't heat it up too much and make sure it's high grade. So the UMF needs to be 15 or higher. Another one is oregano oil. So this is a really powerful antimicrobial that can combat H. pylori, and just follow the recommendations for each oregano oil because it is different depending on if you're taking a capsule, you're eating it, or if you're taking it in a tincture. The other one is garlic. So garlic contains a compound called allicin, which has anti-H. pylori properties. So you can have 1 to 2 raw cloves daily, or you can use garlic supplements as well. You can also heal that gut lining. So things like zinc, slippery elm, aloe vera, L-glutamate, they're all going to help, as well as probiotics and fermented foods. So specifically, Saccharomyces is really beautiful yeast, and that can reduce H. pylori colonization. You can also just follow an anti-inflammatory diet. So removing triggers like gluten, sugar, alcohol, coffee, processed foods, making sure you're eating more bone broth and collagen, and decreasing the amount of stress in your life and increasing the amount of organic vegetables and healthy fats that you're incorporating into your diet. There's also some arguments for cabbage juice. It has a high glutamine component that promotes stomach healing, but not so delicious. The other one is Candida overgrowth and iron depletion. So Candida albicans, it's a fungus that naturally resides in the gut, and we need it. It's so great to have there. But when it overgrows, it can lead to dysbiotic microbiomes, and this can cause systemic inflammation and nutrient malabsorption, including iron. So Candida feeds on iron, and it requires it to thrive and multiply. When we're experiencing Candida overgrowth, Candida organisms compete with the host, so us, for available iron in the gut, and this deprives the body of the iron and its needs for crucial processes like red blood cell production, right? So we start to feel really, really tired because Candida overgrowth is damaging our intestinal lining, causing leaky gut, which is impacting our immune system, which needs iron, and we don't have enough of it, and it just starts to snowball. Some signs of Candida overgrowth: bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, chronic fatigue, brain fog, frequent yeast infections, or oral thrush. So if you look at your tongue in the mirror, if it's white, then you might have a little bit too much Candida. And also sugar cravings. So Candida really loves sugar. So how can you test for Candida? So stool testing can detect Candida overgrowth and measures other imbalances in the gut. Organic acids test, or the OAT test. This measures fungal metabolites, which indicates systemic Candida overgrowth. And also you can pick it up in a blood test, and you can check for Candida antibodies or antigens. So how can we address Candida? So it's a hard one because it's so different for everyone, but you can take things like oregano oil, caprylic acid, berberine, reduce your refined sugar and refined carbohydrates, and maybe increase your fermented food intake. And so decreasing your yeasty foods as well. So no bread, so like no yeast food, so no wheat, I would say, no beer, probably no alcohol as well. So cut all of that out. And also kombucha. I have a few people in my clinic who have excess Candida, and I found that they were big brewers of kombucha. I'm a big lover of kombucha, but in times where I've noticed a little bit too much yeast in my body, I've cut back on it completely, and it's definitely cut back on that Candida overgrowth in my body. So let's talk about why treating iron deficiency without identifying the cause can actually worsen it. And we did touch on this just previously. So without uncovering its root cause, like pathogens, parasites, inflammation, or gut dysfunction, we can inadvertently exacerbate the problem. So again, in cases with H. pylori, this bacteria suppresses stomach acid and impairs iron absorption. It directly uses iron for its survival. And when we supplement it without clearing H. pylori, this allows the bacteria to thrive further and perpetuates gut dysfunction while allowing it to grow, right? Candida overgrowth is the same. So when we don't break apart its protective biofilms that usually are made out of calcium deposits, it can make it really resistant to treatment. And when we have excess iron, we just strengthen these biofilms, and we enable that Candida to persist and outcompete with beneficial gut bacteria. Parasites as well. So internal parasites like hookworms, whipworms, they're really iron-hungry organisms that deplete iron stores. So supplementing with iron can inadvertently feed these parasites without worsening the infection and deficiency. I will be doing a podcast soon on parasites, so keep an eye out for that. Also, bacterial dysbiosis. So when we have pathogenic gut bacteria like E. coli, they can thrive in iron-rich environments, and they increase inflammation, gut damage, and further malabsorption of nutrients. So there is a really big takeaway with addressing infections and pathogens, and a huge focus on the gut. So if you do have low iron and iron deficiency anemia, we really need to make sure that we're addressing what is causing this. It might also be an ulcer. It might also be other lesions in the body that are bleeding out. You might have just had a surgery. There are lots of different reasons why this could have happened. So how are we going to treat and prevent iron deficiency holistically? So first up, identify and address the root cause. Why do we have an iron deficiency in the first place? We don't just want to feed it. We want to find out what's eating it. So stool tests for parasites, H. pylori, candida, absolutely essential before you supplement anything in. Supporting stomach acid. So low stomach acid impairs iron absorption. So making sure you're taking apple cider vinegar and warm water, digestive bitters. Also making sure you're healing the gut. So bone broth, aloe vera, making sure we're outsourcing lots of things. So I like to say when the gut is under a bit of pressure, we need to outsource. So make sure you're chewing your food effectively, making sure you're cooking your food low and slow, low temperatures at a long period of time. So slow cooking your meats, making sure you're eating prebiotic and probiotic foods, sauerkrauts, kimchi, kefir. We don't want to be eating any yeasty foods in this period of time. So when we're managing those infections, H. pylori, mastic gum, we can take licorice, probiotics, and herbal antimicrobials like berberine or oregano oil. Also candida, caprylic acid, oregano oil, garlic, probiotics, parasites is wormwood, black walnut husks, garlic, clove, and you can also take mimosa pudica seeds. They're really, really effective. And also pepitas, so just your stock standard pumpkin seeds and also raw carrot salad. So those are things that you don't negatively get impacted by. So these are just things you can implement even before you go and get those lab tests done to make sure that you're taking care of yourself today. Okay, so you put all of those things in place to make sure you're looking at the root cause of why you actually have iron deficiency. How can we adjust the diet? So heme iron, highly absorbable heme iron sources are organ meats like liver and kidney, red meat, sardines, tuna, poultry. Non-heme iron, I'm not a big proponent of this, especially in this time, because lentils and things like quinoa, especially if you're not processing them effectively and making sure you're soaking them and pairing them with cumin and ezerot, they are not going to take away that phytic acid component, and that means that it's going to be really hard for your body to digest it. So make sure you're soaking your lentils and grains for a really long time. Make sure that you're pairing them with the right herbs so you can actually digest and access that iron and that protein. So lentils, spinach, quinoa, pumpkin seeds, also your chickpeas and your tofu are really, really great. Pairing those non-heme iron foods with vitamin C sources like citrus fruits, strawberries, bell peppers, or tomatoes. And also avoid inhibitors. So calcium, tea, coffee, and high phytate foods like unsoaked grains during iron-rich meals are really going to stop that absorption. Also things like eating high zinc meals around the same time. If you want to take a zinc supplement but you have really low iron, just make sure you're taking it not around the times you're eating a steak or your lentils. Alongside this, making sure you're focusing on the cofactors that upregulate that iron absorption and utilization. So copper, that supports iron mobilization the most. Oysters, shellfish, sesame seeds, cashew. Also vitamin A, so critical for bioavailable copper, so they support one another to absorb and utilize iron in the body. I'm not a big fan of plant-based vitamin A's. So liver, cod liver oil, grass-fed butter, honestly, you cannot get better than that. Also zinc, so oysters, pumpkin seeds, and grass-fed meat. So making sure if you're having an iron-rich meal, if you're supplementing with zinc, take it separately. But when zinc and iron appear in a food source together, you're going to still absorb that iron. B vitamins, also really, really great for red blood cell production and energy metabolism. Liver, eggs, and leafy greens, really, really wonderful. Okay, but what about iron supplementation? I am not the biggest fan of this. I really love to opt for whole food based iron supplements. So desiccated liver capsules are really, really wonderful and they don't irritate the gut. And also work with a practitioner to monitor levels through regular testing, specifically that serum iron, ferritin, transferrin, and TIBC. And we really want to making sure that we're not feeding any of these pathogenic bacteria or fungi, yeast, parasites in the gut before we're doing an iron supplement. And so that kind of brings me to the next point of transfusions and iron transfusions, which I have so many mixed feelings about them. So, as soon as you go and get your low iron in a laboratory and it gets sent to your doctor, they just immediately pretty much go, let's supplement iron or let's give you a transfusion. And so, while intravenous iron therapy can be necessary interventions for severe or unresponsive iron deficiency, it comes with some pretty significant risks if the underlying causes of deficiency aren't addressed. So, number one, inflammation and oxidative stress. IV iron bypasses the body's natural regulatory mechanisms, and this leads to a really rapid iron overload in the tissues. Excess iron can act as a pro-oxidant, increasing that inflammation and oxidative stress, which can worsen conditions like gut dysbiosis, joint pain, and fatigue. Also, again, feeding pathogens and parasites. H. pylori, candida, and gut parasites, they thrive on excess iron, and IV iron can accelerate their growth and formation of their biofilm, which is going to worsen infections and your gut health. Also, iron overload. So, individuals that have that genetic predisposition, like hemochromatosis, you're probably not going to go and get an iron infusion, but you're going to be at high risk of iron toxicity if you get an IV iron transfusion. So, without proper testing, this can lead to liver damage, joint pain, and metabolic dysfunction. So, again, you might be one of those rare cases that you have hemochromatosis and you have all of the same symptoms of iron deficiency, but you didn't test and you're assuming, so you're going to go and get a transfusion. Very rarely are you going to get access to a transfusion without getting your labs done, but that might happen. And there are lots of cases where women go from deficiency to overload in such a short amount of time because their body has been working with a deficiency in iron for such a long time. So it doesn't take much for them to get into that iron overload state. Also, immune suppression. When we have excess iron, this is going to suppress the immune function. This is going to increase the susceptibility of infections, and this is particularly concerning when we have underlying gut infections or chronic pathogens that are already present. Also, cardiovascular risks. So, elevated iron levels have been linked to oxidative damage of blood vessels, increased LDL cholesterol. I have a whole episode on LDL cholesterol and cholesterol, so go listen to that. And higher risks of cardiovascular disease. Also, gastrointestinal disruption. This is the one that I feel like most women complain about after an IV. It bypasses the gut, and this can still worsen gut function by indirectly feeding those dysbiotic bacteria and perpetuating that inflammation. So that the key takeaway from all of this, IV iron has to be used so cautiously and under close medical supervision. And we need to identify and address the root causes of possible gut infections, parasites, poor absorption. And this is crucial, right? So we need to prevent dependency on iron diffusions and future long-term complications like overload, oxidative stress, and even worsening of those infections. But unfortunately, most clinics across the world, in the Western world specifically, use them so willy-nilly and just kind of pass them out to anyone without actually going, hang on a second, why do you actually have an iron deficiency? How can we get this up? This should be the last thing your health practitioner goes to. It should be used for emergencies, but unfortunately, that's not the case. Just to finish up on this, if you'd like to work with me, you're more than welcome to book in with me. I have my clinic open until midway through January, and then I'll open up more after that. I will be taking new clients for the next month, and then I probably will be closing my doors for a short amount of time, just depending on how many people I get come through. I'm having a huge flush at the moment, so keep an eye out for that. And also another thing that I wanted to touch on is if you're an Australian resident, there is an amazing company called iScreen. It's i-screen.com.au. And if you go /test, it'll take you to all of their tests that they have here. I really love this company. I never, ever, ever talk about companies or, promote anyone unless I've actually tried that product and actually like it. And I've specifically had myself go through this company. I've had my partner go through this company and do both of our testing, and I found them absolutely amazing. So it's independent, so you don't have to go through your doctor. Unfortunately, I've had a few clients in the past week say that they've been laughed at in their face from doctors saying that they're not going to order certain labs. And so I think supporting independent laboratories like iScreen is just the way that we have to move forward, because unfortunately, where we are in the world with women's health, we're just not being believed and taken seriously. So take your health into your own hands and support companies like this. So I'll put this all in the little area below the podcast bio, either on YouTube or Spotify. So there's a link there. there's a well woman's check, and then they also have lots of other checks that you can look at, like methylation. You can also look at your microbiome, you can look at your hormones, and of course you can look at a full iron panel, and the well woman's check covers that. So I really love this company. If you use ArcWoman10, you can get 10% off. So yeah, really love that. If you have any recommendations of other companies and independent laboratories across the world, I am looking for one specifically in the UK, in Europe, Canada, the US, and possibly even Southeast Asia and the continent of Africa and South America. So if you had any leads, I would love to support companies and point women in the right direction so they can go and get their labs independently, and they can send them off to a practitioner who actually understands the intricacies of iron deficiency and overload and how to treat you in a personalized and caring way. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. This was a much requested one. Iron is definitely on everyone's mind. Hopefully you understand a lot more about iron, and I hope you have a nice morning, afternoon, and evening, and I'll hear from you next time. Bye.